The Power of Suggestion, the Metaphysical, and the Supernatural. A video essay by Kinda Dead. We perceive a lot in this world, from beautiful sights and sounds to exquisite tastes and smells, and even grandiose ideas about how the world around us operates, even when we don't quite understand how it truly does work. Today I will be speaking specifically on how some choose to perceive the world around them, more specifically on things commonly perceived as supernatural or metaphysical. This includes things like ghosts, demons, magic, extra dimensions, and so on. The idea to make this video came from a discussion I recently had on Twitter in response to a thread about how psychedelic substances can allow you to perceive quote-unquote extra dimensions. Essentially, I stated that the quote-unquote extra dimensions you believe to be perceiving in psychedelics is just a result of your brain trying to rationalize and make sense of an otherwise very intense and nonsensical experience that you yourself have forced upon it. Now, I'm not afraid to admit that I have indulged in some of these substances in the past, sometimes a bit more often than I probably should have. And even at my hardest peaks on these substances, I never believed myself to be perceiving a higher dimension or anything other than funky colors and patterns and sights that were a result of chemical reactions within my brain. I've met many people, some of which who are close personal friends, who believe that while under the effects of particularly large doses of LSD, mushrooms, and most commonly DMT, they had been subjected to an entirely different world. Of course, it may seem that way due to the, for lack of a better term, otherworldly visuals that people specifically take psychedelics to see. Along with these otherworldly visuals, they often report intense emotions and sensations all throughout the body, as their synapses fire on all cylinders and the brain chemistry is altered far beyond what it is on a normal day. This is where the power of suggestion comes in. Oftentimes we cannot explain what it is that we're experiencing, whether it be a psychedelic trip, or perhaps a couple of creaks and knocks in an abandoned house you're exploring with friends. We tend to go with and cling to the conclusion that makes the most sense to us, and oftentimes these conclusions might be that of extra dimensions, or ghosts, or demons. Now, some of you may not be familiar with what exactly the power of suggestion is, so allow me to elaborate. The power of suggestion and the law of concentrated attention states that 1. If you expect something to happen, if someone or something suggests to you a specific outcome, your expectations of that outcome play a major role in its occurrence. The expectation and suggestion alone often unconsciously changes your behavior and your response to help bring into reality the outcome that you are expecting. And 2, when the idea is focused upon, it becomes magnified. Now, how does this factor into the supernatural and metaphysical? That's what I'm here to talk about. Oh, my coffee is some good stuff. This idea has been floating in my head since I was a kid. I had gone on a little ghost hunt for fun with my sisters and their friends on a Civil War trail near my hometown in Virginia. We had been armed with a Ouija board, a VHS camera with a night vision feature, and a FLIR temperature gun, of course, that doubled as a camera, both cameras of which had audio access. Needless to say, we chose this location under the predetermined assumption that it was haunted. And we all went in fully expecting to see a ghost or experience the unexplained, and of course, we thought that we did, upon hearing noises and such coming from the woods, and we of course came back with zero evidence, despite having two cameras capable of catching night vision and thermal and audio. And for years, we all thought for sure that on that night we had experienced the supernatural, but we also went into it expecting it to happen. This, of course, sparked a certain curiosity and fascination within me for all things spooky and supernatural, but as I inched closer and closer to adulthood, my beliefs slowly turned into skepticism, and I began exploring abandoned places with my friends, studying and practicing black magic, trying to subvert myself to extra dimensions by means of psychedelics. As I became more and more skeptical, the occurrences I formerly would have concluded were supernatural began to take on a more natural, scientific, and physical form. Now, some say you can only have these experiences if you're, quote-unquote, open to it, which in and of itself is the power of suggestion, and I personally believe it to be a fallacy. But every time I went into these situations, though slightly skeptical, I still wanted and believed that I would and could have these experiences that I so desperately sought. But slowly, I began to come to grips with the fact that the supernatural knocks and bump in the night that shook me to my core as a youth were actually more mundane occurrences that were a result of houses selling in their foundation, or wind sucking the air out of a room through an open window and pulling doors not all the way shut or loose on their hinges open. These natural and mundane occurrences were only ghostly because I wanted them to be. You can only experience the supernatural because you want it to be. You suggest to yourself that it was the most logical conclusion because you lack the knowledge to determine a physical, worldly conclusion. I remember a few years ago in adulthood, this idea was firmly cemented in my head when I crossed paths with a stranger. Now I was at, and I'm going to be honest, my former drug dealer's house. This stranger was particularly odd, a very small and unkempt-looking man. The type of guy you can tell has eaten one too many acid tabs and mushroom caps in a short time on Earth. For now, we'll call him A. Now, on top of A being very open with his particular and peculiar sect of spirituality, we began to rant on how he believed that he had conjured himself a succubus through means of black magic while on a trip. At the time, I was studying black magic and was reading texts such as the Lesser Key of Solomon and the Red Dragon Grimoire, both of which are still sitting on the shelf to my right. And I was always a fan of the movie VHS. I found the succubus segment within the film to be terrifying and captivating, and still one of the most horrifying movies I've ever seen. So when he spoke, I listened intently, despite being quite blasted and skeptical. A had my full and undivided attention, until he said that this succubus that he had magically conjured during a trip had manifested in the form of masturbation addiction. That is when he completely lost me, and I dismissed him as a complete loon. But the story stuck with me into adulthood, and I continued to reflect on it as years passed, whether it be in hindsight or just my friends making fun of it. Of course, I initially was dismissive because I merely thought that he had suggested to himself that he had summoned a demon to come to grips with the fact that he could not stop beating his meat. But I came to understand more of the metaphysical side of the argument. Demons themselves may not necessarily be physical things that we can touch or see, and could be explained as negative energy that inhabits one's mind or body, giving experiences unique and solely felt by their proprietor. But again, I find this to be a fallacy, falling under someone merely suggesting to themselves that their own self-bred or in some cases inherited negativity is a result of an intangible force, because it's easier for them to accept that conclusion than it is for them to accept that it is a result of their own decisions or underlying mental health issues. The truth is stranger than fiction in most cases, and sometimes we forget that a lot of the things that we can and have experiences are a direct result of the physical world around us doing what it does, or even our brains simply playing tricks on us, and because of this, we like to tell ourselves that we are experiencing more than what we actually are. Sometimes because we can't explain it ourselves with the things we've learned, and other times, like in the cases of A, we want the world to be more exciting than it actually is. He was certain that his masturbation addiction was a result of a malicious entity feeding off of his sexual energy, simply because he couldn't accept the mundane conclusion that he was simply addicted to polishing his knob. Now, psychedelics themselves in the extra dimension are a bit more tangible than things such as ghosts or demons and magics. However, as there have been many studies, some government-funded and top secret, MK Ultra. But the only lasting results that we've seen is an entire generation where half the populace subjected to the testing and subsequently their children are living with skewed worldviews and potentially lots of brain damage. Because these tests weren't always, hey bud, here, take this tab of acid and have fun, and were more commonly two strangers sitting across from each other and having a conversation while drinking complimentary orange juice where half the glass was filled up with liquid LSD. Some of you may know that LSD is most commonly one or two drops placed on a tab that you would take to have a fun night with friends or experience ego death, yada yada. But I'm just going to stop here. In conclusion, as someone who's desperately chased experiences that cannot be explained The only natural conclusion I could come to is that one can only have such experiences by going into them with the predetermined outcome that they had desired in their head, or armed with their own ignorance, they can come to the desired conclusion. To put this in a better and more physical and tangible way, you can go watch some BuzzFeed Unsolved, free plug, and watch how one host is always certain that the bump in the night was a ghost, while the other host dismisses it nonchalantly as simply that, a bump in the night. Thank you for listening. Hopefully this made sense and can help you come to your own new conclusions when you go into these experiences yourself. And I just want to apologize. There were a few times I have stumbled over my words. I'm not too used to speaking out loud, but thank you guys for tuning in. This was KD. If you have anything you would like to add or rebuke or argue, by all means, feel free to leave a comment. And once again, thank you.